All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Anitra Green, and I would like to welcome you to the Learning Table. So if everyone could please use the chat and just, not everyone actually, just a couple of people use the chat to let me know that you can hear me, please. I would greatly appreciate it. Because that's going to be very important to make sure that you, okay, great. I see that people are saying they can hear me. Okay, so as I said, I am Anitra Green, and welcome to the Learning Table. I will serve as your moderator this morning. I work for the EEOC, specifically in the Office of Federal Operations, Federal Sector Program. The Training and Outreach Division. I serve as a trainer. I also serve as an outreach coordinator. And most importantly, I am the lead liaison for the Education Consortium, EdCon. So EdCon, as you know, is a community of practice to enhance the knowledge and skills of EEO practitioners. So a little bit about our housekeeping. Just want to make sure you are aware we are expecting a very large group registered. And so because we are expecting such a large group, we are going to be using the chat feature for communication. I will not be able to unmute you. The only people that will be unmuted will be our two speakers and myself. But please feel free to use the chat if you have questions or concerns. Today's webinar is going to be on our promising practice in affirmative action plans and individuals with disabilities. So before we get started, I'd like to introduce our two guest speakers. We have Lori Grant and Marquis Willoughby. So Lori is a part of the Office of Federal Operations, Federal Sector Program, and she is the Assistant Director of the Agency Oversight Division. Marquis is also a part of the Federal Sector Program, and he serves as an attorney advisor within the Agency Oversight Division. And so just a little bit before we get started, as a reminder, if you'd like more information about the Education Consortium, you can always email us at edcon@eeoc.gov and let us know that you'd like to be a part of the Education Consortium or you'd like more information about it. Also, one of our main forms of communication to let you know what we're doing, where we're going to have our webinars, any free training that we are providing, those social events that we're going to provide will be through Twitter. So please follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is EdconEEOC. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. So we're going to start with Marquis Willoughby. Hopefully, Marquis, your microphone is working properly. Let me know, please, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Anitra. Good morning to everyone. We at the Agency Oversight Division within Federal Sector Programs, OFO, we're very pleased to be a part of this EdCon event today. As Anitra introduced, we will be discussing promising practices for individuals with disabilities in the federal sector today. These promising practices that we're discussing aren't just excellent ideas. They are based and rooted in the legal authorities implemented to ensure equal employment opportunities for people with disabilities, particularly through EEOC regulations. First, we want to quickly note a distinction in terms regarding agency obligations to ensure equal employment opportunities. Next slide, please. Federal agencies are required to establish effective affirmative action programs of equal employment opportunity under Section 717 of Title VII and effective affirmative action programs under Section 501 of the Rehab Act. Affirmative employment under Title VII does not involve the use of numerical goals, preferences, or quotas based on a protected status. So when we're talking about affirmative employment programs, we're not talking about quotas, goals, or preferences based or tied to a protected class. I do want to note that under affirmative employment program obligations, agencies must collect and maintain employment data regarding race, national origin, sex, and disability of its employees. So data collection is a part of affirmative employment programs. And also MD 715 requires self-assessments to determine where barriers to equal employment opportunities exist, or what we call barrier analysis. Next slide, please. So our next term, affirmative action plans. Section 501 of the Rehab Act requires federal agencies to engage in affirmative action for people with disabilities, but it does not explain what affirmative action means. To remedy that, in January 2017, EEOC issued a final rule in the federal workforce regarding federal agencies' affirmative action obligations. The final rule is found at 29 CFR section 16.203. Next slide. So now we're talking about affirmative action plans. And pursuant to the Rehab Act, each agency must implement an affirmative action plan, or AAP, that provides sufficient assurances, procedures, and commitments to ensure adequate hiring, placement, and advancement opportunities for individuals with disabilities at all levels of federal employment. I want to note that this plan should be updated annually, and it's reported to EEOC. Now, also pursuant to the regs at 1614.203, each agency's AAP must commit to numerical goals for people with disabilities. So there are goals that run with the disability affirmative action requirements. 12% for people with disabilities, and people with targeted disabilities, the goal is 2% of the workforce. Okay, next slide, please. So we have selected a variety of promising practices using federal agencies' affirmative action plans and information we've learned during technical assistance visits. We will address the following topics: recruitment, hiring, retention, and advancement, starting in that order. Beginning with recruitment, of course, we're talking about, next slide, please, attracting persons with people with disabilities to work for federal sector, and making them aware and encouraging them to apply for vacancies in our agency. Our first agency we want to note for a promising practice is the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service. FSIS has a Veterans and Disability Recruitment Program Coordinator who assists candidates with disabilities and disabled veterans in the recruitment process by providing resume guidance and guidance regarding veterans' preference, non-competitive hiring, and the application process. FSIS also created a resume repository of individuals with disabilities, and this is a great example of organizational or institutional commitment to recruiting people with disabilities who have that a high degree of expertise in that particular activity of recruitment. And it is prioritizing recruitment. This is, once you have someone tied to that activity, a professional, a position, then you really have institutionalized it into the organization. And also note we have the USDA's FSIS as a resume repository of individuals with disabilities, and this can be used to establish communication with people with disabilities regarding opportunities for employment with the agency, which also is a great practice. Next, we have also with USDA the rural development subcomponent. In fiscal year 2019, rural development attended 27 events designed to introduce USDA to potential applicants with disabilities, including Scott Air Force Base Transition Assistance Programs, CSUN Assistive Technology, Conference, and National Federation for the Blind Conference. Through these events, the agency raised awareness about potential job opportunities for qualified candidates, and they had over 1,300 participants attending these events. This is targeted outreach to attract candidates with disabilities. It raises awareness of opportunities to work for the agency, and it cements relationships with disability-related organizations, which we find to be a promising practice. Next slide, please. With Department of Treasury's Bureau of Engraving and Printing, as part of DEP's efforts to recruit people with disabilities, the agency has developed a tool to assist veterans, including those with disabilities, gain federal employment. The agency partnered with Treasury and Monster Government Services to create a customized job search tool that provides veteran services, including a federal resume tutorial, a military skills translator, as well as a resume to job match capability. This is, a pretty innovative and practical way to increase recruitment of individuals with disabilities, and we applaud it, of course. Next, under Treasury, we have IRS, Internal Revenue Service. IRS created a standard operating procedure containing established contacts with state vocational organizations, as well as other information to assist in the recruitment of people with disabilities and people with targeted disabilities. This is a key partner. This is a great way to establish key partnerships for recruitment through state vocational organizations. It's a best practice that we applaud also. Next slide, please. We have the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA hired a recruiter dedicated to recruiting people with disabilities. This is similar to FSIS, that's establishing through that position or long-term organizational commitment to having an expert recruit people with disabilities. Next, we have the Department of Energy. DOE hosted a disability mentoring day for students with disabilities from 10 colleges to provide information on internships and career opportunities. And this is fostering early professional relationships with students who have disabilities via mentoring, and this is something that we think is a promising practice. Next, we have the National Credit Union Administration, and that agency placed a full-page ad in Diversibility magazine, and this is use of media for targeted recruiting of people with disabilities, and it's media directed specifically at individuals with disabilities, which is even better, very targeted recruitment activity here, and we find that to be a promising practice also. Next slide, please. We have at DHS, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center subcomponent. FLETC maintains an open and continuous voluntary applicant file for specific series and grades for candidates who are appointable using Schedule A and 30% or more disabled veteran hiring authorities. Those files are reviewed for all position openings and forwarded to the hiring official prior to the announcement being released. Use of special hiring authorities such as Schedule A is a critical tool for recruiting and identifying people with disabilities for positions. And of course, as a promising practice because of that. Under the Department of Defense, we have the Defense Health Agency. DHA's Human Resources Office, Learning and Development Team, and Equal Opportunity and Diversity Management Program created the Diversity and Strategic Plan to recruit people with disabilities. The agency also participated in the Workforce Recruitment Program, Wounded Warriors programs, and career fairs to recruit applicants with disabilities. And we think this is very thoughtful, deliberate. This demonstrates a very thoughtful, deliberate commitment to recruit people with disabilities. And they also participated in the WRP, the Workforce Recruitment Program, Wounded Warriors career fairs, and these were targeted at people with disabilities, which we think is the best way to recruit, or one of the best ways to recruit individuals with disabilities to your agency. Next, we have Defense Media Agency. In 2018, DMA hosted an open house. Of course, they're under Department of Defense. They hosted an open house for individuals with disabilities in which agency officials provided feedback to people with disabilities regarding their resumes and informed them about current vacancies within the agency. During the event, attendees also received briefings about the Schedule A hiring authority and the ability to apply for positions on USA Jobs. This we find to be a very impressive, very individualized dialogue with people with disabilities. We talked to DMA. They invited people onto base from the community, people with disabilities, to attend this event, and they had very individualized feedback and dialogue with the agency, and discussion of the Schedule A hiring authority and how to actually apply for any positions that may exist at the agency. The agency said that during the pandemic, they didn't do this, I guess, 2020. However, they're scheduling, they're hoping at least to schedule another event post-pandemic. And if the pandemic is not behind us soon, maybe to host this event in a virtual format. We're very impressed by this idea to recruit individuals with disabilities through an open house at the agency, very individualized feedback. Next, we have DOD's Washington Headquarters Services. WHS offered resume writing workshops, federal hiring authority sessions, one-on-one assistance, and preliminary interviews at targeted disabled veteran recruiting events, such as the Wounded Warrior Education and Hiring Expo. Again, this is developing community linkages for the purpose of recruitment and collaboration with qualified candidates. Our next slide is regarding the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, and that agency's Office of Human Resources is working with the digital media strategist to develop a social media outreach program to promote opportunities for individuals with disabilities on the agency's Facebook page and website. Of course, social media is a pivotal tool to foster relationships with disability community that will lead to increased recruitment and hiring of those individuals. It's an opportunity to promote your agency and its opportunities directly to people with disabilities, as well as to hear from them, from the community, about their career interests, concerns about the hiring process, et cetera, et cetera. But we find this also to be a promising practice. Now, Lori is going to talk about some promising practices in hiring.
Thanks, Marquis. As Marquis shared, many agencies' affirmative action plans have focused on the recruitment of people with disabilities and include innovative practices to identify applicants with disabilities. However, as I describe the promising practices for hiring people with disabilities, I ask you to consider whether these practices actually rise to the level of affirmative action. In the agency that you see on the screen, Securities and Exchange Commission, we note two practices. The first involves the Office of Human Resources staffing specialists using a checklist when vacant positions are identified to ensure that hiring managers have all of the options available to them to fill the position, and that includes applicants who apply using Schedule A and the veteran hiring authorities. The second PWTD, I noticed, stands for People with Targeted Disabilities. The second practice that SEC has involves their learning and development team and their equal opportunity and diversity management program, utilizing a diversity and strategic plan to recruit people with targeted disabilities. This practice is really important because it institutionalizes the hiring goal and demonstrates leadership's commitment to achieving the goals. We think both of these practices are valuable and will hopefully improve the agency's hiring of people with disabilities. Next slide, please. The next agency is the Department of Homeland Security, and this agency created a disability employment fact sheet which provides hiring officials with information about the disability employment program's goal to hire people with disabilities and to reach the regulatory goals. In 2019, the agency updated the fact sheet to include its obligations under 29 CFR 1614. Similar to the previous agency, DHS educates hiring officials about the hiring goals and how to achieve them. The next agency, Central Intelligence Agency, created an Ability Talent Broker position, ATB, in 2019 to facilitate the processing of people with disabilities from the application stage through onboarding. The ATBs also ensure that the applicants with disabilities receive reasonable accommodations during the hiring process. This innovative practice helps the agency provide a successful onboarding experience, which is also really important to ensuring retention of people with disabilities. Next slide, please. Here we're highlighting the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They have 3 promising practices. The first involves the agency head referencing the hiring goal to all managers and including the use of Schedule A and other non-competitive hiring authorities to promote people with disabilities for hiring and advancement. The second practice, the agency requires supervisors and managers at all levels to take training within their first year as a supervisor and every 2 or 3 years thereafter on the use of the special hiring authorities such as Schedule A. The agency also encourages hiring managers to use programs such as the Workforce Recruitment Program to identify, interview, and also hire people with disabilities and people with targeted disabilities. CFPB's plan has focused on educating hiring managers about the hiring goals and then providing them with the tools to achieve those goals. As a result, the agency is utilizing these practices to move the agency forward so that they can be successful and achieve the hiring goals. Next slide, please. The next agency, the Small Business Administration, has created an internal database which contains resumes for people with disabilities and veterans who are 30% or more disabled. The resumes are shared with supervisors and managers upon request. This resume database provides hiring managers with a helpful tool to easily find applicants with disabilities. And the next agency you see is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. In 2019, NRC provided training to 104 of its hiring managers on the use of the hiring authorities and also how to access resumes for people with disabilities as part of a mandatory annual training. In this way, NRC has educated its hiring managers on the special hiring authorities, including information on how to identify applicants with disabilities. This, we find, is a promising practice. One other practice I'd like to note is that OPM has created an agency talent portal. This portal actually pulls resumes from USA Jobs if the applicants agree to post their resumes in a public for the public to see. The reason I'm highlighting this portal is that agencies can also use this tool to identify people with disabilities as applicants. And in this way, a hiring manager can go outside actually the normal recruitment and hiring process to find qualified candidates who are eligible for Schedule A and other special hiring authorities. The next slide, please. Okay, thank you. The next agency is Defense Technical Information Center. DTIC reported that its managers are now required to review Schedule A eligible database for positions before any hiring action can occur. As a result, the agency has increased its hiring of people with disabilities. This agency has taken an affirmative step in requiring hiring managers to review the Schedule A database and basically provide a justification in a way for not selecting someone using Schedule A. The next agency, the Department of Defense National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, has tasked its Human Development Directorate with hosting various symposiums and other hiring events. These occurred in 2017. In particular, the People with Disabilities Recruitment Showcase promoted awareness of the agency to attendees from 7 universities. As a result, the agency made 26 on-the-spot offers of employment through direct hiring to people with disabilities. This defense agency is engaged in direct hires at the showcase, which is an effective tool to identify and hire people with disabilities. And I'll pass it back to Marquis.
Thanks, Lori. So if we're great at recruiting and great at hiring, the next question is, how good are we at retaining people or keeping people with disabilities in our organization? Because we will undo the good work at recruiting and hiring if we aren't great at retention. So our first agency that has a promising practice is the Agency for Global Media. And AGM purchased a secure tracking system for their reasonable accommodation program, which allows the agency to quickly identify expired accommodations or those that may need updated medical documentation. The system records the request, defines the process, tracks implementation, and generates statistical reports for future analysis. We want to note that providing reasonable accommodations is key to retaining people with disabilities. And here we have an agency that's being very proactive regarding their ongoing obligation to provide reasonable accommodations for individuals with disabilities. And they're doing that via tracking and through statistical analysis. And we find that to be a promising practice towards the goal of retaining individuals with disabilities. Next, we have the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, created a captioning budget within the Technology and Innovation Division to ensure that agency-wide meetings and events have funding outside of the reasonable accommodation budget. This is an example of an agency making sure the reasonable accommodation of captioning is automatic, and that the impetus to provide it is placed on the agency on an ongoing, matter of course, routine basis. There is also ensuring budgetary concerns are not an impediment to providing this reasonable accommodation and technological accessibility issue for individuals with disabilities. And we're very excited about this practice and think it's a promising practice to share with the federal sector. Next, we have Department of Agriculture. USDA's dynamic reasonable accommodation website features captioned video segments on the basics of reasonable accommodation and in-depth discussions of topics about the RA process, types of reasonable accommodation roles and responsibilities, other topics such as interactive process, do's and don'ts for supervisors, medical documentation, timeframes, confidentiality requirements, undue hardship, and animals in the workplace as a reasonable accommodation. This is an example of an agency making information on reasonable accommodation and the procedures easily accessible in a format that is dynamic. The information is accurate, easy to understand, easy to use, and just plain interesting. And we're excited about this example of a promising practice. Next, we have the Department of Education. And education has two lift requirement bands separate and apart from their shuttle services. In its motor pool for use by headquarters employees, education is seeking to secure accessible vans in regional office motor pools and will provide an accessible vehicle through rental or contract if necessary. Through this practice, education is being proactive. They are institutionalizing accessibility in all aspects of employment, and we really applaud this practice as an example toward of practices that help to retain individuals with disabilities. Next slide, please. We have Department of Commerce. In 2019, Commerce conducted a department-wide retention survey to investigate why certain demographic groups, including people with disabilities, were separating at disproportionately higher rates. Over 10,841 employees were surveyed with a 41.6% response rate. Also, in fiscal year 2018, Commerce established a system to monitor the status of Schedule A employees to maximize conversion opportunities. All eligible Schedule A employees with disabilities were converted after 2 years. Regarding the first practice, this is an example where the agency, they know that something is causing people with disabilities to separate at disproportionately high rates. And the survey is a way of investigating to see if there are barriers causing that, see what the cause of that statistical anomaly or, this disproportionate statistics regarding individuals with disabilities. There are also other ways to identify if barriers are causing separations, but barrier analysis is a way to get at the root cause of statistical anomalies or things that seem problematic based on statistics. The second practice is helping to ensure that Schedule A employees are converted to permanent regular status in a timely manner. And that can have an impact on your retention of individuals with disabilities. And we applaud Commerce and are excited about these particular practices. Pardon me. Next, we have Federal Trade Commission. FTC's Disability Program Manager, or DPM, facilitated an introduction to reasonable accommodation training session to provide new managers in the Bureau of Consumer Protection with necessary information to timely respond to reasonable accommodation requests. Also, in fiscal year 2018, FTC processed 65 out of 66 reasonable accommodation requests in 10 business days or less. The agency stated the average processing time was 2 business days. Here, the first practice, the agency is, through this practice, stressing the important role of managers in providing timely, reasonable accommodations, as we talked about previously. That's important in retaining individuals with disabilities. And the second practice is sort of illustrates the fact they're actually, it's probably having a positive impact because 65 out of 66 reasonable accommodation requests were processed in 10 business days or less, which is pretty impressive, almost all of them within 10 business days or less. Now, we did call the FTC because the federal sector, when they heard about this, they wanted to know what is going on at FTC. This is just unreal. We can't believe it. And so their disability program manager told us that the majority of their reasonable accommodation requests concern technology, including standing desks, speaking software, or schedule flexibility, as well as telework, normally, in normal times. However, during the pandemic, their requests have plunged. Of course, this data is pre-pandemic because everyone is working full-time telework at this point. Also, they noted that they have a dedicated disability program manager now, and that has streamlined the processing of reasonable accommodation requests, made it more efficient, made the provision of them quicker. You have more dedicated expertise working on requests. And finally, FTC wanted us to know that their Office of Chief Information Officer now categorizes reasonable accommodation requests as high priority if they're technology related, and has dedicated staff with her rapidly providing reasonable accommodation requests. So if it involves a technology matter, then you already have embedded within the Chief Information Officer's office and staff people who have specialized knowledge to respond quickly to reasonable accommodation requests. And they think that has streamlined and made the process more efficient. Okay, our next slide is Health and Human Services Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The Disability Program Manager, HR official, and Disability Link conducted a disability awareness seminar. Topics discussed were disability etiquette and language, hiring and retention of people with disabilities, and Schedule A hiring. Workplace education and awareness has a great impact on culture and climate of the agency, and those are big factors in retaining individuals with disabilities. And specifically, disability awareness and etiquette training usually focuses on addresses issues such as unconscious bias, harassment, as well as inclusion in the overall environment of the agency. And that can help create the type of climate that fosters the retention of people with disabilities. Other ideas for retention include disability ERGs or employee groups or affinity groups. Also, sorry, my notes. I'm like, what did I write right here? Onboard programs that assist people with individuals that assist people with disabilities. That can also help with retention of individuals with disabilities. Okay. And now we are moving to our last category, or at least of the four categories, advancement of individuals with disabilities, and Lori will be presenting that section.
Thanks, Marquis. Similar to hiring, most agencies have not taken the step from affirmative employment to affirmative action in advancing people with disabilities. In particular, agencies have struggled to develop plans that move beyond utilizing the IDP process and requiring people with disabilities to compete for training and career advancement opportunities. I will share the few advancement plans that we've received in the last several years. The first involves Department of Labor. This agency utilizes all available methods to provide internal advancement opportunities for people with disabilities, including increasing awareness of managers to reach affirmative action goals, encouraging managers to restructure jobs, design bridge positions, and implement IDPs for people with disabilities. Encourage the use of skill building surveys to address people with disabilities' potential gaps in skills, and also encourage people with disabilities to participate in training opportunities offered by the Disability Action Group. In this way, DOL is educating and encouraging managers to improve advancement opportunities for people with disabilities so that the agency can meet the regulatory goals. Next slide, please. The Department of Defense's Washington Headquarters Services uses its special emphasis program to place people with disabilities in a billet that has promotion potential, so basically a mission-critical occupation. In addition to providing accessible technology, the agency encourages people with disabilities to participate in training and development opportunities. Another defense agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, has created a disability council that has improved accessibility within the agency by installing motion sensor water stations, relocating badge swiping to be more accessible for people with disabilities, installing additional push plates, and improving the push plate functionality and reliability. The agency has also established a sign language group, and this way the agency is focusing on ensuring a workplace that is conducive for people with disabilities. It's a good environment, basically. Next slide, please. The last agency involves the Health and Human Services, Health Resources and Services Administration, which communicates advancement opportunities to the agency's Council on Employees with Disabilities to ensure broad dissemination. In this way, the agency is advertising promotions and other advancement opportunities so that people with disabilities can apply for the positions. Next slide, please. Using the chat function, I'd like everyone to answer, if you can, the first question. How many agencies state that they encourage people with disabilities to apply to training programs and promotions and then use a competitive selection process? Well, it looks like we may have gotten a couple of responses. The reason I asked this question is that that's the way that most of the agencies we've seen in the affirmative action plans talk about training opportunities, that the agencies submit the announcement and wait for people with disabilities to apply, and then they have to compete for training opportunities and promotions just like every other employee. The next question is, can agencies establish an advancement plan that designates slots for people with disabilities in training programs? And that's yes, no response, if you could, in the chat. So it seems that most people agree that advancement plans can include this type of option by designating slots in training programs. We have yet to see agencies report this in their affirmative action plans, however. Then the last question, can agencies establish an advancement plan that sets aside vacant positions for people with disabilities? And we have mostly yeses, some no's, and some I don't know answers. This too is available as an affirmative action. element of agencies' plans. We have not seen agencies report this as a way to recruit people with disabilities in their AAPs in the last several years. Next slide, please. So overall, the federal sector has identified very few promising practices concerning advancement plans for people with disabilities. And we really need more ideas from agencies. And if any of you all have any suggestions that we could then share with the federal community, we would truly love to hear them. If you would like to add anything in the chat function that hasn't been covered so far, if your agencies are using any practices, we'd really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much, Lori and Marquis. So we have just learned quite a bit about promising practices regarding recruiting, hiring, retention, and advancement. So Lori did ask if you have any suggestions, and you can add them into the chat. Great. I'd like to thank Lori and Marquis for such an informative presentation. This is the presentation that I'm sure the agencies that were represented here will truly be able to use. Remember, we were talking about promising practice with regards to recruiting, hiring, retention, and advancement. I will be sure to send out the presentation to everyone who has logged into this webinar today. Lastly, as I said, we are usually trying to provide one of these webinars at least once every other month. And so we're going to provide another webinar. It's coming up really soon. Very great information that you would like to be a part of. So make sure you email us once again to let us know that you'd like to be a part of it. And that email address, I'm adding it in, it's edcon@eeoc.gov. And lastly, follow us on Twitter, because that's where I am marketing all of our webinars. They are going to be marketed on Twitter. So make sure you follow us there. If you don't have any other questions, I'd like to say thank you and have a great day.